Hi there, and welcome to the Modern Divorce Podcast. This is Billy Tarasio with a very special guest today that I can't wait to talk to, Mr. Kimball Lewis. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Billy. Nice to meet you.
It's
Thanks
not
for having me.
doctor or anything, right?
No, it's not doctor.
Okay,
No.
good, good. I would feel badly. Um, Welcome to the show. So excited to have you on. You are a behaviorist.
I am the CEO of a company called empoweringparents.com, and we are the producers of a child behavior program called the Total Transformation Program, which was created by a guy named James Lehman about 10 years ago. And what the program is, it's basically a how-to guide on how to deal with kids that are exhibiting defiant behaviors, backtalk, motivation problems. So it's very practical, like what do you do when your child is doing X? And so the
Right.
parents find us because they're dealing with a recurring problem. They're getting really frustrated with it and not sure what to do. They go to Google, they start Googling, what do I do about this? And they find us, and we have
Yeah.
we have a program
I've
all set
heard of
up
the
for.
Total Transformation
Yeah.
Program. You guys do a lot of radio advertising.
Yeah, we did in the past. We're mostly online now, but we used to be all over the radio airwaves when people listened to the radio. It's mostly podcasting and other things now. So
Yeah. Well, I'm so excited to talk to you because I am a divorce attorney. I'm a mom of four. Um, One of them was diagnosed with oppositional defiant at some point. He doesn't have really any of those issues anymore, but I've dealt with specifically, poorly behaved children.
right, right.
And that was so hard as a young parent to have a child that didn't behave how I thought he should behave was
Yep.
so hard on somebody who had been successful in the things that they had tried to accomplish. And then to have a kiddo that didn't behave the way you thought they should was very hard. And I know I've got lots and lots of clients who have especially teenagers that they're really struggling with, but also young children. And so
Mhm.
I can't wait to kind of get your thoughts on these scenarios. And not all kids are the same. So what do you tell parents with difficult children?
Well, I'm glad you actually brought up the way you framed it the way you did, because we always say parent the child you have, not the child you wish you had. And all kids are different.
Yeah.
And the parents come to us, they've been very successful with the first two kids. The
Mm-hmm.
third kid is difficult,
Mm-hmm.
hard. It's not like they're doing anything wrong per
Mm-hmm.
se. This child just presents different issues. And a lot of times those kids are very successful kids in life.
Mm-hmm.
They're a little bit oppositional, they go against the grain, they're the innovators a lot of times, but if that's not channeled properly, it leads to very poor problem solving skills in life, and they don't end up in a good place. So you want to tackle those things early on if possible. So yeah, so we say, you need to parent that child that you have, and you might have to do things differently than you do with the other two kids. So
Yeah, absolutely. Like my oldest, who was the kiddo, that was the most difficult and was diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder, is
yep,
now just the most, wonderful, checked in, emotionally present,
yep,
fairly well behaved 16-year-old, which is fantastic. But I
that's
had to
awesome. Yeah, that's a
go
great
to counseling and be told like to change my perspective and to kind of get over it, get over the fact that your expectations are not being
mm.
met. Do better.
Yeah, so that's helpful, but then also you need to have a plan in place for what to do when your child is misbehaving. And the nice thing is when parents come to us, they've been going through these problems over and over again, and they know it's going to happen again. And we actually formulate a plan. Here's what you're going to do when your child does X. And fundamentally, kids who are having behavior problems, what they really have is a problem solving issue. I mean,
Mhm.
they're young, and we forget that in life, like you have to learn functional skills. You have to learn like how to get your schoolwork done, just like how to stop doing what you want to do and do the things you need to do. That's a skill that you have to learn in life. And or emotional problems. Some kids have trouble dealing with frustration and anger.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
from our viewpoint, frustration and anger are basically problems that you need to learn how to solve, because they're never going to go away. You're going to have frustration and anger throughout your whole life. As you get older and you develop well, you will get better at solving those problems. And these kids, they're not solving those problems very well. And what they're doing is they're turning to disrespectful, abusive, argumentative behaviors as a way to solve those problems. And the problem is it actually works. So
It
like
does.
It does work. So like, let's say the child is uncomfortable, doesn't like putting down their electronics to do their chores. And they start arguing about it. If they argue enough and make it miserable enough for the parent stops asking them to do the chores. And in
Huh.
their mind, that problem has solved. Now, in the long term, that's not a good problem solving skill. It's not going to serve you well in life. It works well when you're dependent living at home. But when you get out into the real world, that doesn't work very well. But
Mhm.
these things work when you constantly argue with your parents.
Mhm.
The parents after a while will break down. They actually will give in. They'll actually avoid asking kids to meet their responsibilities because it's not worth the fight. If you work all day and you come home, you're tired. Do you want that? Do you really want that fight? Or you just do the dishes yourself, or you just do whatever? Do you? And a lot of times, and the kids know that they figure out that if they push back enough, the parent will stop trying.
So let's talk about because we could just talk about parenting
Yeah, yeah,
for a million years, but let's talk about um, parents who are going through a divorce or parents who are recently divorced. Now, this is a complete shift in so many things. First of all, whatever division of duty or division of parenting you had when you
yeah.
were in an intact house is gone. And sometimes that's a good thing. But you have to kind of restart. And so that's what I want to talk about. If parents are starting from scratch with their kids, now not as a unit, not as a husband, wife, or as a two-parent household
Yeah.
and going to a one-parent household, what can they do to set themselves and their children up for success?
So, um, first of all, it's a very challenging situation. Now you have two households, two sets of rules. And so one thing we point out to parents in this situation is that you make the rules in your household. Your ex makes the rules in their household, and you actually don't have control over that. So focus on the rules in your household.
Mm-hmm.
Very often, you're not going to agree with how they do things in the other household,
Mm-hmm.
but you actually don't have much control over that. If it's a safety issue, you might be able to,
Mm-hmm.
get involved that way. But otherwise, that parents in their household, you parent in your household. But it's also it can be a fresh start, and we recommend that parents set up a culture of accountability and a set of
Mm-hmm.
rules. And you actually sit down with your kids and you explain what the rules are. It doesn't have to be like long, but it could be, you have 7 or 8 basic rules in your household about what reasonable behavior is.
Mm-hmm.
And especially with younger kids, but actually even with older kids as well, some of our advice is as simple as you want to write those things down and put them on the refrigerator.
Yeah.
Like we don't swear in this household, we don't talk disrespectfully. There's no electronics until your homework's done, things like that. If you have those spelled out, it's very clear to the child what the rules are. They may not like it, but at least you can point to something. You say, in this household we have rules, and those are the rules, and you can point to the refrigerator. That takes a little bit of the heat off the parent, because if you don't have that thing spelled out clearly, it feels like it's a personal battle between you and your child, as opposed to between your child and the rules, which are this sort of third independent party. So if you think about a imagine police, if there wasn't speed limits and it was up to the police's discretion as to like whether you were speeding or not.
Right.
That's a hard place for a police officer to be. Like, it's very helpful for them to say, on this road the speed limit is 55 and you were going 70, therefore. And you can argue all you want about whether you get a ticket from the police officer, but the rules are set, and you can point to the rules as this sort of independent third party. So things like that, like specifying what the rules are. And you can do that, and you should, if you're starting clean, you should do that. We recommend for married parents to do the same thing, but that's one place where you
Absolutely.
can do.
Okay. All right.
A couple other things, if you want me to keep going.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's really important to establish the rules and write them down,
Yeah.
and that's helped me for sure.
Yeah.
Um, and you can do it in like 4 or 5 rules that basically do it, say
Yeah.
everything you want to say.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't have to be long and involved. It's basically what's considered respectful
Totally.
behavior in this household.
Yeah. Clean up after yourself. Be respectful of others.
Yeah. Yep.
No
And
violence.
no violence. And that happens, punching the walls, but the key to that is also you'll be held responsible with consequences when you break those rules, and explain to your kids what the consequences are you know when they break the rules. But particularly for divorced parents, a lot of parents will feel guilty because divorce is hard on kids,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll feel guilty, and they may feel guilty enough that they don't want to hold their child accountable and give them consequences for their behaviors, and that's not a good. We tell them it's very important that limits and consequences are for your child's own good. I mean,
Okay,
it's helps them develop.
let's spend some time on this because limits and consequences are hard, I think, in this day and age, and they're hard when you're going to be losing your kids like possession of them maybe later in the week or
Yeah.
fairly soon. So what do you recommend for effective consequences?
So effective consequences are, they're not long term, they're short term, and they're usually some sort of task based. Like you have to accomplish something to get your privilege back. So the most common thing to take away these days is like the phone.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're, if you're swearing at mom or hitting your brother or sister, you'll take the phone away for like 3 hours. And in that meantime, they have to behave respectfully.
Mm-hmm.
And then they only get it back if they behaved respectfully during that time frame.
Mm-hmm.
But you wanted a reasonable length of time that they get it back in their possession.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So then for a couple of reasons, one is you want them successful in like practicing good behavior because they're not good at it. They actually need practice doing this.
Totally.
Second, second of all, if you take it away for a week and they do something tomorrow, you have nothing left to take away.
Right.
Right. So you need to get it back and forth. And then we also counsel parents that these kids they have problem solving skills and they have problems controlling their emotions and their reactions. And you don't fix it with one consequence. It's going to take time. It might take a week. It might take 2 weeks. Just have to be consistent. So just because it's not working after the first week or so doesn't mean that it's not working. You just have to give it a little more time. So
Mm-hmm.
you want to have effective consequences. They're not like punishment based. They're more like you need to practice, behaving well during a set time frame. And then if you do that successfully, you'll get it back. And then inevitably they're going to have a problem again. You take it away again, then they'll earn it back. So task-based things, especially or curfew. Let's say they don't come in on time. For curfew, you can set their curfew back. You can ground them for a couple of days or something, but set their curfew back and say, if you get home on time for the next 4 weeks, I'll put your curfew back up to where it was, and they sort of earn that. They earn that back.
Okay, so this is interesting, and there was another like pivotal moment in my parenting journey where I found out that like I was being far too lax. And much of what you read is all about like relationship based parenting and love and logic, and basically looking at every behavior as a lack of a tool that then you have to teach kids. So I think that there's like that camp of parents. And then there's
Yeah.
the camp of parents that tend to be like more militant. Um, and what I read that was major for me was that kids do best, we know this, in a home that is strict and loving. But if you don't have strict and loving, the next best option on the pendulum is strict and hostile. Like it's better to be strict and hostile than hands off or let your kids get away with too much stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you have to ask yourself. Have to ask yourself what kind of household you want to live in. And as a parent, we take the approach that someone has to be in charge in the household. Someone has to make the final decision. It's either the parent or the child, and we highly recommend it's the parent. It doesn't have to be that way. You can do it the other way, and that has consequences. All these things have consequences, but consequences for bad behavior. You want to make sure that what their behaviors are not gaining them something. So you want to make sure that their bad behaviors don't result in their problem being solved as a result of that bad behavior. At the same time, so that's the consequences. That's the holding them accountable. You do at the same time want to, after maybe the next day, after things have calmed down a little bit, have what we call sort of a problem solving conversation and just say, look, did things work out the way you wanted to? Yes, it didn't. Here's, what could you do? Next time you get angry and frustrated, instead of punching the wall, is there something else you think you could do? Because it's not going to be effective. It's not helpful.
How long have you
but
been?
you have to make sure you're doing the consequences, and then you want to offer them an alternative way to deal with that.
There is so much behavioral health going on in our society. I want to know, do you think that this is new um, the rise in behavioral health challenges, or do you think that we're just labeling it more often?
I think we're labeling it more often.
Okay.
I think sometimes it's an excuse. We have James Lehman, who was the founder of the Total Transformation Program. He would often talk about this because he made the program in the sort of late 2000s, like around 2010. And around that time, it was in the middle of what they call the esteem movement,
Mhm, mhm,
which was that the argument is that kids misbehave because they have low self-esteem. And
mm,
he always argued, and that always kind of bothered me a little bit. And he always argued, and one of the reasons I liked him so much, even back then, was that it's true that kids who have behavior problems often have low self-esteem, but he didn't see it as an effective approach to try to improve their esteem as a way to get their behavior to improve. He saw the opposite happen when he worked with kids, which is that when the kid learns to behave better, the esteem improves. So
yeah,
he had the saying, he said, you can't feel your way to better behavior, but you can behave your way to better feelings. And when the kid starts behaving better by being held accountable and by being offered some problem solving skills that are alternatives to what their bad behaviors, that they start feeling better about themselves.
okay,
So we
all right,
just think they had it backwards.
that's really, really good,
And then
really, really good.
in the end, the goal is good behavior, regardless of how you feel about yourself. And again,
Mm.
I'll go back to the speed limit example. It doesn't say speed limit 55 unless you're feeling bad about yourself, then don't worry about it. Like it's right. We all gonna have ups and downs throughout life. You have to learn to control and not abuse other people, regardless of how you feel. And it's a challenge because I'm the same way with like I have kids, right? When work is really hard or something, when I'm getting stressed out, my likelihood of like misbehaving to my kids or my wife or anything else goes way up when I'm having other problems.
Right, right.
And I have to like work on the fact that I'm responsible for my behavior regardless of how I'm feeling.
That's one thing that I think is really hard for parents who are just going through divorce. They're extremely stressed out.
They are,
They're
yeah.
overworked, they're tired, and they're not at their best. And their kids also are experiencing those things and need their parents to be at their best. And it's almost an impossibility. Any tips for that situation?
Um, you need to forgive yourself first of all when you're not perfect in those situations because it's going to happen. You want to minimize. If at a minimum you're aware that the yelling and the screaming and other stuff that going to come up is not effective,
Yeah,
then minimize. Just if it happens much less, that's better.
yeah,
Zero doesn't seem reasonable to me because
right.
these are so stressful.
So just try to do better.
But if you think yelling is going to improve your child's behavior, you just need to know it's not. Like if yelling and screaming worked, we wouldn't have any child behavior problems, right? We just scream at our honestly, we would just scream at our kids and problem solved. And if you didn't like conflict, right? You could send your child to the therapist. The therapist would scream at him for 50 minutes. You'd pay them $200, and then the child's good for like a week, and you come back and do another screaming session. But it doesn't work that way. So you just be aware that it's not effective. Give yourself some grace and your partner some grace or whoever if they're just like you offer your kid, like if your kid is doing pretty well then misbehaves again or whatever, like you want to get better, you want to have a higher average, you want to get things better, but perfect is not reasonable.
I like
So
it.
and you're going to lose. I mean, I'm glad I'm talking to a divorce attorney because I mean you can talk to like parent specialists who are like have PhDs and everything else. But I've always maintained that the divorce attorneys know more than anyone about what really happens in a divorce. Because I don't think people are necessarily honest with their doctors.
Right.
But
I think
divorce attorneys see everything that's going on. And,
they
and I
do.
remember my sister-in-law was getting divorced. And at the beginning of the divorce, the attorney said to her, this is what's likely to happen. And he wasn't talking legal stuff. He was talking about like emotional and other stuff. Here's what's going to happen over the next 6 months. And she's like, oh my God, like how do you know that was exactly what was going to happen? And she's like, I've seen it so many times.
It is a very
So
interesting view into humanity. We are, and some divorce attorneys hate it, but like it's really a privilege to I think, be able to see people so intimately and also observe the
yeah.
things that we're observing. The next question I have is about depressed kids. So I have a lot of parents who have teenagers who are withdrawn. who are not engaged. And it's not that they're behaving poorly, they're just not doing anything.
Mhm.
And parents are really worried about their children who have been diagnosed with depression, and they worry about suicide risk.
Yeah, that's hard. I mean, you should be in touch with your pediatrician in those situations. Um, and we'd recommend that if you have a therapist you work with, also make sure that you guys are all coordinating on the same page around those things. But also keep in mind that um, that not having boundaries or consequences or limits on any child, regardless of what their situation is not a good thing. It doesn't put them in a better place. And we've talked about how there's some kids who the parents kind of give up on them and they stop meeting requirements, and the child actually will eventually see that as they've given up on me. Like
Mm,
I must be defective. I can't
mm,
control how I behave. I can't control X, Y, and Z. So you still want to, it's like the behavior, it's like the idea that the goal is good behavior no matter how you're feeling. You still need to have the expectations around your child. But
yeah,
part of the problem solving side of it is taking into account that they're dealing with depression issues or ADHD issues or whatever. Those are sort of mitigating factors.
they are. Like they have a major impact on these kiddos' um capacity. Like it's a different maybe like baseline of expectation, but it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that the baseline shouldn't keep going up, right? You just
Yep.
want improvement.
Yeah,
Um,
we have this thing where we say start where your child is and move forward. And your child may be at a different place. And if they're suffering from, if they have ADHD or depression or whatever, the starting point's different.
mhm.
Like if you're doing a timeout or something with an ADHD child, it may not be reasonable to think that they can sit still for 45 minutes. Like that might be an unreasonable consequence. You might have to start at 15 minutes and then work your way up over time. So
Yeah.
got to start from where your child is and then move forward from that. And kids are at different places.
Let's talk about
Um,
screen limits.
yeah, electronics are the enemy. But go ahead.
I mean, right? Like
Hey,
the depressed kiddo is in his or her room
yeah,
on electronics, not engaging with humans in real life. Um, but the parent doesn't want to take away their only social interaction. What should we be doing with screen limits at all ages?
I think you need to have limits around it if you're concerned about who they're online with. For homework and other issues, homework, schoolwork, and all the issues about what you might be doing online, the bedroom is one of the worst places for the
Mm,
computer and electronics.
mhm,
So you can solve a lot of these problems by putting this stuff in a public place.
mhm.
Uh,
I think that is such a good tip. Um, of course, the flip side is people will say, well, it's too loud or I can't concentrate. I can't do my homework in a public place because it's too loud. Exactly.
head, headphones. That's why I'm wearing headphones.
Yeah. Yeah. The
Um,
other tricky thing is like if your kids have laptops, they're portable. You're
yeah,
not watching them all the time.
and the phones. I mean, my kids are 17 and 18 now, so they have they've earned the right to live their life without me, like, butting in on everything. But when
Mhm,
they were younger and stuff, and just a few short years ago, their cell phones during the school day. We did some homeschooling for a while, and at night their cell phones were downstairs. Like they're not in your bedroom. If you need to contact someone, or whatever, you can come down, sit in the living room, and do it. But you can't spend all day in your room with your phone and electronics. I cut off the internet to the bedrooms except during certain hours. Just things like that, where you have to ask yourself: if your child has depression issues, it's a difficult no matter what, but is it going to be better by them being holed up in their room and not having limits set? I think the answer is probably no.
right.
Are they going to complain about you setting those limits? Yes, they're going to complain, but that's part of the process of getting them out of that rut.
Right. Right. I mean, I think one of the most I think that, not engaging with your friends socially and not being engaged physically are two things that probably promoted the depression of many
Yeah,
teenagers. And of course, like we had this darn pandemic to deal with, so it
I
wasn't
know it's not.
hard to get around those things. But and now people are used to that.
Yeah, and I mean, my kids are online a lot, and they're online with other people. It's social
Mm-hmm.
for them.
Mm-hmm.
And not all. I'm fairly open about it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, as long as they're meeting all their responsibilities, schoolwork otherwise, then they kind of can spend their free time the way they'd like, and that happens to be online. And they've kind of earned that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
not all parents are going to agree with that approach, but they spend a lot of time. But it's social online. Now, I
And it
remember seeing a
depends on the kid. It just like
yeah,
different kids react differently, you
yeah,
know?
and we force them. I mean, our kids have to get out of the house. Like they have to. We I remember my mother when I was a kid would say, like, guys, you have to leave. It's whatever. Leave the house. You can't come back for 6 hours. We
Wow.
were off on our own. I mean,
Go
it
find
was
friends.
you had to go find stuff and figure stuff out to do. So we tell the kids like they have access to a car. So we're like, you guys got to go. Like you can't spend the day in the house. So I mean,
Good.
when it's too much. So, but the
Right.
main thing is they need to be meeting their responsibilities. If it's too comfortable, if doing nothing is too comfortable, that's a problem. If your child's like not being motivated and not being productive, that needs to be uncomfortable to them. Otherwise, there's nothing to force them out and
I'm
do it.
really
So,
glad that you mentioned that. A lack of motivation is another, I think, issue that parents have with their kiddos, especially once you hit, preteens or teens. How do you get kids motivated?
well, the truth is they're not necessarily going to like school. Not all people did. You can't force that. Not everyone's going to like their job. You can't force that. But if you don't show up for your job, you don't get paid. If you don't do your schoolwork, you have to lose privileges. So you have to. So homework for me, my kids' homework is important to me. It's important to me they do their homework and get good grades. They may not know why that's important, but I know why in the long run why it's important, and it's important to me. So what I do is I tie their schoolwork to something that's important to them.
Mhm.
It's not necessarily their schoolwork. It's usually their electronics or their free time or whatever. They have to earn that through getting their work done. So
Mhm.
so I'm it's difficult to get your child motivated to do school.
Yeah.
You can't necessarily make them want to do school, but but again, you can tie what they are motivated for, which is their electronics and other stuff, to earning that privilege. So you tie schoolwork to being able to use their phones and other stuff, and then they'll do their schoolwork. And the other thing is we're motivated when we have success.
Mhm.
So it's not like you get motivated, then you do schoolwork. You do
Mhm.
schoolwork, and if you're disciplined about it and you can figure out how to be disciplined about it, then you have some success, then you get motivated.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? They have it backwards about like if you feel better about yourself, you'll behave better. No, if you behave better, you'll start feeling better about yourself. And same thing with motivation. It's not like you sit around and wait till you get motivated, then do your schoolwork. No, you do your schoolwork and then you get motivated. So
Okay.
that's the world's kind of got it backwards. Like
Yeah. Yeah, but you're
and
right, early success feels good, and then you do what you need to do to get
it
more
does.
success.
There's nothing like having a little bit of success that gets a kid motivated.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So you want to set them up for success. They don't know that thing is they don't know that. They never really experienced that. So you
Mhm.
want to set them up for success. And you do that by you need to insert discipline
Yeah.
and accountability in there. And they're not going to like it at first. You're gonna be
Well,
the
and
bad
this
guy.
is
That's the thing. It's hard.
especially difficult in a divorced parent's household.
Yeah.
And when a kid, sometimes teenagers will be like, I'm out. Mom, you're too strict. I'm going to go to dad's. And there's not a ton that you can do if your kid is 16 in Arizona at that point. So you really have to start earlier. So let's
Yeah.
back up. Let's talk about, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds. We're not taking away their phones. They don't have phones. How do we help get them motivated to
Some
do school?
some some of them do. They all have electronics though. They all have other stuff, and you have timeouts. You have some other things that no matter what it is, you find out what's important to your child, and there's always something that's important to your child, and you tie that to them behaving properly and meeting whatever expectations you have for them.
You know what I have not heard you talk
So
about is rewards, buying your kids stuff, taking them to do stuff. What is your opinion on rewards?
yeah, rewards are great,
Okay,
but
those
you
are
have to be but but you have to be very careful. A reward can very easily become a bribe.
Okay, so what's the
So,
line?
so, so if it's what comes first. So if you're bribing your kids, if you're giving them money or saying you get extra you get extra benefits for meeting your core responsibilities, you're actually bribing your kid to do those responsibilities.
Okay, let's say that again. Say it again.
It's sometimes it feels the same, like the same thing, but it's a if you need to pay your child somehow to get them to do their chores, you're bribing them.
Okay,
If your
but
child has to do their chores and if they don't, they get a consequence, then that's a responsibility they've met. Okay.
okay.
If they do their chores over and over again, like really successfully, there's nothing wrong with giving them a reward after a while. But they earn the rewards.
What if the
So the
system,
rewards come after you've done the work. The rewards aren't a bribe to get them to do the work.
sure, but what if you set up a system that says, when you do these things and these chores and you accomplish them, then you make X amount of dollars in allowance? Is that a bribe?
It it uh it it's a bribe if the child has the option of saying, you know what, I don't really feel like doing my chores, so I'll give up my allowance.
I'm failing.
Chores is it's where the power in the situation
Yeah, right.
resides. If you feel like the only way you can get your child to do something is by of meeting a responsibility of which is their responsibility in their household. So rewards are kind of an above and beyond type thing.
Yeah.
It's
Okay, so
almost better just we like giving kids allowances, but not tied to anything. Just give them an allowance.
mhm,
If they
mhm.
don't meet a responsibility, you can then take it away. But the allowance has nothing to do with do it because that sets up a consequence. And then rewards are sort of an above and beyond thing.
You mean, so there's no system for rewards, like it's just a surprise, like a surprise bonus?
Yeah, it's not. It can be that way. You can tell them ahead of time what it might be. Um, like for schoolwork, like say I'll give you, the reward would be if you actually get the good grades, not I'll give you money if you go and do your studying right now.
Sure. Okay. So you bring home A's, I'll give you $10 an A. That's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
But it's not fine to be like, do your homework, I'll give you $1.
If you do your if you put down your electronics and go do your homework, I'll give
Uh,
you $10.
uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay. All right. I
You just have
gotta,
to be careful because
I know.
it's a fine line in a gray area. You have to ask yourself, are you is the reward the only way you can get your child to meet a responsibility? You want the kids to meet their responsibilities. It's
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
it's a rewards are nice. They're helpful. Um, but just to make sure it's not a bribe.
Okay. Make sure it's not a bribe.
I mean,
Which,
this you have this.
which really
You're a
sounds,
lawyer, right?
yeah.
Sometimes a bribe's a fine line. Like, is this a bribe or is this like, it's
I think it
and the
comes down
parent
to,
knows if it's a bribe or not. In their mind, they know whether or not they're bribing their child or if they're like, good job, junior. Here's a reward.
it comes back to what you said about power. Who's in control? And
Yeah.
like, if and um there's a very famous
It's a really good question you're asking. This is a subtle area. It's hard to explain it.
right, but it
But
kind of, there's a Supreme Court decision that's very famous about pornography,
you
and
know when you see it.
the Supreme Court justice and the opinion says the thing about pornography is when you see it. And so maybe like you got to check in and understand, like, how does this feel? How does this reward
Yeah.
feel to me as a parent? Do I feel like I'm motivating and properly incentivizing, or do I feel like I'm being taken advantage of?
Yeah. Is your child holding you hostage? Or are you rewarding your child for and you're happy about giving the reward because like you've done good work.
Okay, so another question is, do I
So
feel proud of my child's behavior and want to reward them, or am I
yeah,
annoyed that I have to give them this thing?
yeah, that's the other, yes.
Okay. All right. This is good stuff. This is highly
It's a
practical.
gray area. You're asking a really good question. It's hard to explain that one, but
Yeah.
again, it's like the Supreme Court pornography decision about, you know it when you see it. It's kind of like that. You know it. Ask yourself. There's a power struggle going on often between parents and kids,
Hmm.
and ask yourself where's the power balance in this thing? Is your child making the rules, or are you making the rules?
Can we
And we
talk about,
recommend that the parents make the rules in the household. They tend to be older and more mature than the kids. So
right, right.
not
Wisdom.
not that the kids don't have a say, or they should be able to weigh in and stuff, but ultimately, the households where the parents make the rules seems better. It's their house. It's actually their house. So that's the other thing.
Right.
So
So, like, I think what you're saying is super important. Like, a concept of authority is really important.
yeah, it's not a
Without
bad
that,
thing. It's not a
you
bad.
have
Some people think
chaos.
it's a bad word. It's a
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, next topic, which is really hard for parents, food.
food.
Yeah. So sometimes I'll have clients who have children who are overweight
Yeah.
or children who just refuse to eat, you know, anything of substance and healthy food. What do you think about that?
Um, are these kids who have other behavior problems?
I don't think so. I think that like sometimes people are talking to me about the struggle that
Yeah.
they've got with their kids and food, and it's a very specific issue.
Well, um, when things start moving too far towards, like, there might be mental health issues or whatever, I usually step back and say that's something to talk with a physician or mental health expert, rather than someone who's offering parental advice and stuff. I think it's perfectly reasonable that if you're buying the food in the household, you get to buy the food you want to buy. And half the issue with weight, personally anyway, with eating stuff, is that if there's a lot of crap available in the house, it's going to get eaten. And if you
Mhm.
don't buy that stuff, you're less likely to eat it. So you have some control over that, and you
Mhm.
can make the meals that you want to make, and the kids have to eat whatever meal you make. So
Okay, so do you think
um
it's perfectly fine to say
but
you have to eat your food at a meal?
it's a tough call.
I know.
um if the kids, I think they can go hungry, that's fine. You know what it is, you have to pick your battles. So most of the parents we're dealing with, they're coming to us because they're having major behavior problems with their kids, and it manifests itself in a whole bunch of different ways. A lot of times the not eating might be a defiance issue or whatever,
Mhm.
but and it's one of many things, because the kids just have poor problem solving skills. Like they fight against everything as a way to, like, whenever they're have to do something they don't want to do. In those situations, we tell parents to start with one behavior and focus on it, an important behavior. Because if you try to handle all of it, it's going to be overwhelming. Pick one behavior, develop a plan for that behavior, and get that behavior working well, and then move on to the next ones. It's very rare that eating is the number one problem.
Mhm.
If
Mhm.
they have other behavior problems, if they're swearing at you, if they're hitting their sister,
Oh.
if they're like breaking stuff or whatever, those are the ones that, we tend to focus on that. And there's a lot of stuff you can overlook. Even things like, if you have a child who swears at you and very disrespectful, and they roll their eyes once in a while, we usually say just ignore the eye rolling. Because if you completely ignore it, it's not effective anymore. They do it because it's effective and it drives you crazy.
Right.
And it's disrespectful, but it's not like they said "F you, mom," like, to your face. That's a problem. The eye
Right.
rolling, if you completely ignore it, they'll stop doing it after a while, because it'll be kind of meaningless. So ignoring certain behaviors is actually very important.
Okay.
So if your child has a health issue, I don't know. The eating's hard. That's a hard one.
Well, so what I'm talking
Um,
about is my kid refuses to eat any fruits or vegetables. They only eat junk all day.
no junk in the house,
No junk in the house.
and find fruits and vegetables they like. Kids actually like fruit. If yeah,
Yeah, just
it's
remove
pretty
it.
rare to find a kid who won't, if you get the right ones together. Like my one son won't eat tomatoes. He hates tomatoes. He'll never like tomatoes, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah. One
But
day.
you can offer them other things. But if the house is full of junk, and once you get that taste for the junk food, you don't, because everything else seems bland after you've been eating junk food the whole time. So
Right, right. Those issues aren't so different from adults.
yeah, it's the same. I
So
think, yeah.
maybe,
Except adults might actually have a little more self control, but not always. But
yeah. Yeah.
we talk about modeling. That's a term we use, like model behavior. If you don't want your kids yelling and screaming, then don't yell and scream at your kids. Like, even though you want to. That's the whole thing. Like anger and frustration are normal feelings that we all still have into adulthood, but we've learned to control them most of the time. And you want to model those behaviors for your child. So even around eating and other stuff, you just sort of model the behaviors. The kid may not be eating the food just because they're in what we call a power struggle with the parent.
Sure.
And it's the power struggle manifests itself in lots of different ways.
Um,
So
okay.
I used to just shrug my shoulders with the eating and just feel like, then
It was just a battle you didn't pick.
it was a battle I tended not to pick.
Yeah.
I didn't make special food for them necessarily, but
Mhm.
it's a battle I tended not to pick.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. But that is harder when, like, if you have a child who's overweight and you're
Yeah,
concerned, then you don't want to just be hands off. Like, you want, because if your kids don't have healthy habits, we all know what happens.
yeah, it's a
So that
problem.
is
Yeah,
hard. And it's especially hard if like one kiddo has this problem, but other kiddos don't. And I want to talk about that. So a lot of my clients really struggle with one child disrupting the household and making it harder for everybody else. And I know of quite a few clients who just say, go, I don't want you in my house until you can come back and stop being disruptive and stop being disrespectful. I don't want you to live here. What do
you
you
mean
think?
like older kids, like 18 and 19-year-old kids?
No, I mean like 15 and 16 and
Oh, is there a
14.
place for them? Is there a place for them to go at that age, or are these divorced? They go to the other parent.
Yeah, they go to the other parent.
Um, that's a good question about whether to actually like tell them to go to the other parent.
Yeah.
We do. One of the things is there are in all of this issue with parents and defiant kids. Very often there are innocent siblings in the household
Yeah.
who are profoundly affected by the child's behavior, and we counsel parents that it's important to put a system, and now a lot of times that's what the total transformation is, that the program we have, it's a comprehensive system. You want to put a system in place for this child because they're wreaking havoc on the other kids. Those
Right.
other kids are victims of this issue, so you can't just ignore it.
Right.
So we have so setting rules and expectations around that child's important for the other kids in the household.
Okay. So it sounds like what you're
So
saying is it may be appropriate for you to say, unless you're willing to follow these rules in my house, you're not welcome here.
well, they need to follow the rules in the house, and there's consequences, and so you have to ask yourself, what are the consequences you want to apply. And if in your if in a parent's particular situation, a reasonable consequence, and nothing else has worked, is they go somewhere else. That seems like a reasonable thing for a parent to do.
Yeah. So what I'm usually talking to the clients about is,
It's possible. Hold on a second. It's sorry. A lot of times a program hasn't been put in place, and that you can solve this problem before you go to an extreme.
Mhm. Yeah,
So we, if you exhaust the other possibilities, then yeah, everything's on the table.
everything's on the table.
Everything's on the table.
This is a big deal. This comes up for a lot of clients. And I think getting a system in place far before you reach that point is by far the
Yeah.
best thing you can possibly do. And then I think another question you need to ask is my child better off at the other parent's house? For whatever reason, is that parent-child relationship or that household such that the child tends to thrive there better? Or is being at that other house really, really bad for that child? Because you've got to think about your kids, the innocent kids, the well-behaved innocent kids,
Yeah.
the problem child, all the households, all the dynamics. It's tough.
Yeah. That's a hard one. I give parents a lot of credit who will say to themselves, you know what, maybe the child's better off in the other household. Like
Yeah,
we just have this like, um, yeah, that's a you're hitting some very raw emotion areas that parents go through. And I'm glad that you're saying these things, because parents feel these things. They probably feel incredible guilt for even thinking these things. One of our most popular articles on the site is I don't like my child. That's the title of the article. I don't like my child.
yeah,
And the crux of the article is what you don't like is their behavior,
right.
and that you want to, there are things you can do to get that in line. But that's another reason why, being serious about your child's behavior and having limits and accountability is that if you don't get that in your child, you may not like them.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Another thing that I have heard is this concept of don't allow your children to do anything that would make you not like them,
Yeah,
which
that's
is like mind blowing, but also seems like absolutely impossible.
hmm well, yeah, because you don't want them going into the world that way.
No, and you
And if
don't
they
want
don't
to
behave well,
unlike your child
you'll
or
stop
sibling.
liking them if they're not behaving well.
Right, right.
Now
And
it's the behaviors you don't like, but it's hard to differentiate the two after a while.
yeah. I also think
So
one more thing is really important. Like, does your partner make you a better parent or not? One of the hardest things for people to decide is, should I get a divorce, or will getting a divorce be so bad for my kids that I want to stay in a relationship that is far less than ideal? And one of the things that's really important for parents to know is that conflict and chaos are the two things that are just the worst possible thing for kids. Is that true in your research and understanding as well?
um, it can be. I mean, a lot of homes are, when there's that much conflict going on, might be improved in a divorce situation. That's a hard one to answer. The That's stressful for kids. Divorce is stressful for kids.
Absolutely.
All these things are stressful. We urge parents to get help in those situations.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes one parent wants help, the other one doesn't want help, which is a
Yeah.
very challenging place to be.
Yeah.
Um,
But one of
yeah,
the
I mean,
things
go ahead.
that I really encourage people to ask themselves is, can you be a good parent, and can you set up a good structure for your children in the current relationship you're in? Um, it's really important to do this. It's really important to set up a structure that of accountability that works for your children and that gives them all these tools we're talking about.
Yeah,
So you have to figure out a way to do it.
yeah, and your spouse may not be on the same page, or your ex may not be on the same page. We have a program that's part of the Total Transformation called Two Parents, One Plan, and it talks about how very often um, parents may agree on uh, what's the term here? They may have uh, similar goals and desires,
Yeah.
but very different ways to get to there.
Yeah.
And we just recommend that you focus and say, look, we have very similar interests in wanting the kids to behave well,
Hmm.
and but we have different ways of getting there. And if you kind of focus around, okay, what is it that we do agree on? In
Hmm.
this ocean of disagreement, there are islands of agreement,
Hmm.
and I just recommend you got to get on one of those islands,
Hmm.
and then maybe get to another island, and then spend your time there, because if there's a way for you to work it out with that spouse effectively, it benefits the kids.
Absolutely.
So, and
Without a
we
doubt.
usually recommend, don't drag the kids into the fight with your spouse.
Hmm.
Try to insulate them from it
Yeah.
if you
And I
can.
think if you use, correct me if I'm wrong, I've never used total transformation, but I'm thinking if you can get a plan that is pre-written for you that you two can agree to execute, it's going to be a lot easier than trying to come up with one on your own if
Yeah.
you aren't naturally inclined to do things the same
Yep.
way.
Yep. And you also, it does all of that, and also it says you may not agree with the plan. So
Mm.
ahead of time, you have a set of things like, how are we going to know if it's working? And you lay out like the things, how we know if it's going to working or not, and then you come back together and you reassess.
Oh, that's a really important point that you just made. So one parent wants to do the plan, one parent's like, I don't agree with it. And one way to say, why don't we try it, is we're going to agree to try it
Yep.
for X amount of time. And this is how we're going to decide if it's successful or not. And we're going to
Yes.
decide that in advance of committing to the plan.
Yep.
I really like that. That's
And,
brilliant.
and you can work with like one of our parent coaches, or with a counselor or someone. They sort of serve as a mediator in those situations.
Okay. So you
We've
all,
had a lot of, the good news is that there are so many success stories out there of people on the edge, and kids they thought were hopeless or whatever that have turned around. Like it's really incredible. I mean, look back at, I just look back like in high school, like all the crazy stuff that went on and everything. Most of those kids, like, they come out of it eventually. Like
yeah,
there's hope. There is like real hope. This stuff works, and if you haven't put a comprehensive approach together on it, just there's a lot of hope. So it works a lot.
well,
Go ahead.
Kimball, no, I mean
Can I,
that,
can I, can I,
go ahead.
I was gonna say one more point I wanted to make sure I said on the
Yes.
podcast. This is very important. don't blame your child. I'm sorry, don't blame your spouse or your ex for your child's behavior.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that.
Okay. That's one of the, I had a little star here. I go, no matter what, make sure you say it on the podcast, because you may not like how your spouse is parenting or your ex is parenting the child, and you'll blame them for the way your child's behaving.
Absolutely.
That absolves your child of responsibility for their behavior. You want the accountability on your child, not on the spouse.
This is so important. This happens every
And
day. I'll have somebody call me and be like, my kiddo bites only on the days that they come from their dad's house.
yes. And even if you think that's the reason, never tell your child that, because then they're like, then their behavior is the responsibility of another person. And you want the accountability on that child.
Right. It goes back to
So
it doesn't matter why, it matters what. Like
yes.
no matter what's going on emotionally, no matter how we feel, we have to show up and go to work every day. I love that. It's
Yeah.
good stuff.
Yeah. That was the one thing I started. Just had to.
I'm so happy because I was about to wrap it up because we are out of time. But
Yeah.
Kimball, this has been fantastic. We'll have links to the program and the resources. So I've heard parent coaching, I've heard
Yep.
mediators, I've heard a program. What other resources do you offer?
Those are the main things that we have. Our website has hundreds of free articles. You can come onto our website and sign up for our newsletter and get the articles. And we highly recommend people come to these sites and listen to podcasts like yours, because you are walking in the footsteps of people that have been there before, and they can give you lots of wisdom. We're not alone. It feels like it's unique to us, but it's not. People have been through this before, and it's very important to learn from the people that have come before us.
Good stuff. I love it. Have a wonderful day. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.